All right, cool, looking good. So, the first question I had for you, Mum, was about the food pyramid. Um, so I've just come across it for my studies here, and it seems a little bit outdated.
Yeah.
So what can you tell me about it?
Okay. So before Ansel Keys, who decided to get rid of fats out of the American diet, there was probably more fat in the food pyramid, and butter and dairy and milk and cheese and all that kind of stuff. So when they decided that everyone needed to have a low fat diet, they then realised they still needed to get people's calories to the right level. So how were they going to do that? And the quickest and easiest way for them to do it was to increase the carbs. So that's why you'll see the starchy carbs probably in a lot of food pyramids at the bottom of the pyramid. And then you'll get, as you go up, things like dairy and red meat and stuff will be right at the top in tiny amounts. Whereas, if you look at a keto diet or something like that, it's almost upside down, isn't it? It's almost, you've got all the good fats at the bottom and all your veg, non-starchy. And then when you go up, you'll have tiny amounts of white flour and potato, and if any, really, on a keto, wouldn't you? What were you taught at school?
I think it was, it was like the staple of the diet was bread, I think. It was bread, cereal, meat, pasta,
Potatoes, probably.
yeah, potatoes. They said the fruit and veg, but I think it was more of an emphasis on the fruit side of it because they knew how difficult it was to get kids to have vegetables, and because the kids have a sweet tooth.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I remember from it.
Yeah, and then I think, as I say, I think the fats, particularly the things that are the tiny little triangle at the top, really, in a lot of ones that we're taught. But we know that actually having those fats in your diet are really important, and why a lot of people now have got issues with brain health and also with things like type 2 diabetes, because they followed the food pyramid because that's what they were told. And I think the book I read, which is called The Big Fat Surprise, when they came to create the new food pyramid, in Washington, they said, well, surely we should trial this. We should see if it works. And they just said, look, we haven't got time. We just need to get something out. So they didn't do any clinical trials or anything or any work on it. They just said, this is what we're doing. So I think that's also, an issue that normally you wouldn't do that. Normally you would do some sort of work beforehand and then say, okay, this is good or this isn't. But they just decided, categorically fat was all evil.
And why was that?
Because Ansel Keys did a 7-country study in America. So I can't remember which president it was, but one of their presidents had really bad heart disease, and it was, it's a bit like at the moment with Trump. It was kind of, we've got to save the president. We've got to put our best people on it. And so Ansel Keys, who was head of kind of nutrition, he did a 7-country study in Europe, and he looked at all the countries that had a high incidence of heart disease, and then he correlated that to their diet. And so he said the ones that have got a high fat diet have got high heart disease, such as Germany.
Right, okay.
Right. But what he chose to do was to exclude Italy and France from that 7-country study because they didn't meet his hypothesis. But
okay.
Yeah, but with the Mediterranean diet. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you look at Germany, yes, it does have a high fat diet, but it also has a very high sugar diet, doesn't it? Because they love their cakes and and all their starches and all that sort of stuff. So that's where, and when anybody ever asked him about the data and said, well, look, the countries that you said are high fat are also high sugar, those people got discredited. And it was hidden in the paper. It was like page 100 kind of thing, that they had high sugar as well. But he was the American Heart Association at the time was funded by Procter and Gamble, and they were making all the low fat alternatives. So they were making Chris. Have you heard of Crisco? It's like in America.
It's a butter substitute.
It's like a butter substitute. They were making all the margarines and all that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah.
They really wanted to discredit the dairy industry because that was getting in the way of them selling their products. So so it did help people's heart disease. So it did improve people's heart disease, but because they were using, sunflower oil and what they call canola oil in America, so rapeseed oil, which are all omega-6 fats, when they were doing clinical trials, they found that people weren't dying of heart disease because they were dying of bowel cancer before the heart disease kicked in.
Wow.
Yeah. So they could say they're not dying of heart disease. But we know the omega-6 fats are very pro-inflammatory. And we know, that inflammation is kind of the root of a lot of cancers. That's kind of what promotes cancer. So, and inflammation can be in all guises. Being obese can create inflammation. It's not just about what you're eating, but so it's that's why the book's kind of called the Big Fat Surprise. You could call it the Big Fat Lie. But Ansel Keys had a lot of power. He was on the front of Time magazine, which is quite incredible. And have you ever heard of K rations?
No.
So K rations were developed for the army, so that they, so that the soldiers had enough to fuel them, and they were called K rations after him. So the K for keys.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah. So that's how important he was.
Interesting.
So he was a very powerful man, and what he said went, kind of thing. So it's a real shame. I just think if he had taken into account, Italy and France. And because and Greece is the same. They have such a low incidence of heart disease because of their, and I think if you look at southern Italy rather than northern Italy, because southern Italy is more of a, they eat a lot of fish, they eat a lot of pulses as well as olive oil and olives. And you look at the Greek diet with their feta and their fish and their meat. They eat a lot of salad, don't they? They eat a lot of fresh stuff, and so that's the balance that keeps them well. They don't, you think about when you go to a Greek restaurant, there isn't really a dessert menu, is there?
No, that's a good point. They're already adding it for tourism benefits.
Yeah, there's a little bit of fruit maybe, isn't there? But it's not part of what they do. So it is a shame, because I think the knock on is we've seen this epidemic of type 2 diabetes, where people have gone low fat, high carbs, because the calories, there's 9 calories in a gram of fat, there's 4 in a gram of carbohydrate. And so if you're told calories in, calories out, well, the easiest way to drop your calories is to drop your fat.
Oh, got ya. Yes, it's a very good point.
Yeah,
very
because what people will do, I did Weight Watchers many, many years ago, and you were limited on alcohol, which it makes sense. You have 14 units. And so what people would do is they would save up their points, and so that they could have their 14 units of alcohol on Friday and Saturday. So they'd maybe, let's say they were given 18 points a day in terms of calories. They would maybe have 10 points a day Monday to Friday, so they had enough points to get hammered Friday and Saturday. So people, I think, find when they're restricted in a certain way like that, they'll find ways around it. A bit like people with gastric bands and things like that will liquidize Mars bars. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, so you can still have it, but you just get it through it.
Yeah, but you're not fundamentally changing your attitude to food.
Yeah. I think the freaky thing about the Keys thing as well is that, like you said, is that he'd already come up with his conclusion.
Yeah. He
was just finding things to fit that, as opposed to, here's my hypothesis, let's see if it works. Oh, it doesn't work, or a slight tweak.
Yeah.
Which is, I can imagine that's been a case of a lot of things from then onwards. A lot of people, a lot of, I guess like actual research probably isn't like that, but when it's like politicised or there sounds to be a lot of money involved, I imagine they'd be like, right, here's the hypothesis, I'm going to match that to my conclusion, and I'm going to find everything that supports it.
Well, when you're, when I did my dissertation for my nutrition degree, you're taught how to read clinical trial papers, and you're looking out for, who funded it.
Yeah.
Is it double-blind, placebo-controlled?
Is it replicable?
Yeah. Is it more of a correlation? You'll see things which will say, men that took vitamin E on its own got a greater rate of heart disease.
Yeah.
But you could also say men that play golf have a greater rate of heart disease, because there's a really high number of men that actually have a heart attack and die on the golf course.
Well, that was,
So it's like, so you've got a correlation as opposed to a causation.
and epidemiology for a lot of it as well.
Yeah, and actually, when you look at when you look at the Big Fat Surprise, which I found really interesting, a lot of the long-term studies that they've done with people, so they might have done, I think they use the Seven-day Adventists come up a lot.
Yes.
Because obviously they've got a very strict way of eating, so they can look at what they're doing. But equally, some people would be on, say, like a 5-year study, but they're asked to keep a food diary 1 day a year. So they'll just drop into them and just say, so what are you eating this week? And then that becomes the 5-year conclusions, because they're not tracking people daily. It's just a spot check once a year.
Oh,
well, I mean, to be fair, some might be more than once a year, but that's kind of the minimum. They would just say to people, what are you eating? What are you doing? How much activity are you doing? Get a big questionnaire come through, kind of thing. And I know from getting food diaries from people, people don't tell the truth. When you go to join a new doctor and they say, how many units of alcohol do you have a week, and how often do you exercise, and you kind of do a bit of exactly. So all these things are dependent on people, but you equally you can't really lock people up for 5 years and feed them a specific thing. Now they have done that. Again, there's a really good book by Dr. Fung called The Obesity Code. And they did actually, kind of almost conscript people, and they were experimenting on famine. So they were just seeing how low they could get the calories for people to survive, and it was the only way they could do that would be to lock them up effectively. Yeah. Otherwise, you would cheat, wouldn't you? You'd get hungry and you'd go and have a biscuit.
Yeah.
So and the other one they did. On fats, there was a time when people thought eggs were bad for you, and again that was because of the fat in the egg. Now there is, because there's cholesterol in the yolk, but it's actually the good cholesterol, it's the HDL cholesterol. But again, eggs were demonized as part of this whole anti-cholesterol thing, and they went into a ward of a schizophrenia ward and fed them like 15 eggs a day to see whether there was any issue with their cholesterol, and there wasn't. But it's just, I don't know, it's kind of like experimenting on people that have no say in it. I mean, it's so, but there wasn't any negative issue at all. It's more about how you cook the egg, really.